course, it's going to be another Sicilian because that's pretty much all Bobby ever played in response to e4. Knight f3, d6, and d4. And we have the identical line, at least at the start. We get a Najdorf's variation. But here, Cardoso pulls out something we don't see all too often, and that's the Zagreb variation. Zagreb, one of those Yugoslavian cities that I can't remember whether it belongs to Serbia or Croatia or which of those republics it now belongs to. Well, I guess I should find out. I get Bled and Zagreb and what's the other one? Bled's actually in Slovenia. Zagreb is in Croatia. It's the capital of Croatia. Danny, how do you not know that? And then what's the other big city over there? It's slipping my mind. I have to call up a map. Oh, I know. Oh, no. Wait a minute. Yeah, Belgrade. Where's Belgrade? Belgrade is the one I was thinking of, but I'm not sure. Not sure where that is either. It's in Serbia. Belgrade is in Serbia. Right. I don't know why I get these cities confused. They're far enough away from each other. All that because Cardoso played the Zagreb variation. Well, e5 here hits the knight, and so he retreats to e2. Bishop e7, bishop g2, both sides castle. Queen's knight d7. And here Rodolfo plays h3. Usually a4 is played first, and after b6, then h3. We get bishop b7 and g4. And here I think knight c5 and knight g3 and rook c8. That is the more frequently played line. Cardoso plays h3 right away here, and Bobby with b5 and f4. Bishop b7, pawn g4, and pawn b4. Knight d5, and knight takes the knight. Pawn takes the knight. The Valbar favoring black here with a half-point assessment, so basically equal. You understand, I'm sure, that for computer evaluation of 1 pawn to -1 pawn, that span is pretty much equal for we humans. Here, queen b6 check and king h2. Now pawn takes the pawn and bishop takes the pawn. Bishop f6. And this also prevents the knight from coming to the d4 square. Oops, wrong color. Pawn c3, and the queen's rook comes to c8. Rook c1 from white. Yeah, knight g3 is apparently better. Rook fe8. Queen c2. Queen c2 is quite curious to me, moving in line with this rook. The bot calls for knight g3 again. I thought knight d4 is possible, maybe even preferable. But of course, I'm scored inaccurate. Well, I have not been faring too well with the annotator tonight, have I? Certainly queen c2 is ill-advised, to say the least. Knight f8, the bot calling for queen d8. Perhaps pawn g6 is a move here. I'm almost afraid to play it the way I've been getting nailed. Ah! It's even getting worse. At least up until now, I've only been inaccurate. That's being scored as an outright mistake, which is hard to imagine. Again, the eval bar is pretty much center, and it goes from 0.2 to 0.0. How is a 0.2 difference a mistake? Well, c4. Oh, I skipped a move. I'm like, why is it not letting me play c4? It's black to move. Knight f8. Now c4. Knight g6. Bishop back to g3. Queen e3. Battery attacking the knight. The bot, again, preferring queen to d8. Dare I say that rook e7 should be possible? Or am I really just risking more humiliation from the bot? Oh, jeez. Oh my goodness. Last week I had 7 brilliancies. This week, just bad mark after bad. Has any one of my moves been approved by the bot? I guess there was one. One of my moves that the bot said was right. Queen e3 by Bobby. Rook c e1, hitting the queen. Bishop e5, super attacking that bishop. It is super defended, but it does put the kibosh on any discovered attacks by moving the knight. Or does it? I guess he could play knight f4, because that interferes with the bishop. Really, the idea of bishop to e5 is to prevent the knight from coming to c3, though, I think, because obviously that allows the queen to capture the bishop. Yeah, I guess queen c5 should be considered here. Get out of the rook's line of fire and battery attack on the c-file. Well, knight f4 is what he played, discovering an attack on the queen. Pretty slick. Now queen d4, queen c5 is the best choice. Let's talk about a few bad choices real quick. First thing you don't want to play here is b3. This counterattack gets scored as a blunder. And the reason is queen to f5 can be played here. And if you persist in your counterattack, say knight to e7, that also, okay, it changed its mind. It gave me a question mark at first and then changed it. Well, then rook takes the queen. You don't want to rook takes the queen here, by the way. Rook takes the queen here is the wrong approach, because then black's counterattack is justified. And you've got all kinds of things going on here. It's very complicated. Perhaps knight takes knight, bishop takes the bishop check, and rook takes the bishop, but the thing black's really eyeballing is getting behind his passed pawn, opening the c-file. And that's going to force the rook to blockade, and there goes the knight. And black looks pretty good here. Let's go back. So on b3, white has queen f5, and if you persist with knight, then it should be safe to take the queen. Yes? And yeah. So this doesn't look too good for black. He's down now a knight. Guess you can grab one pawn, one or the other. I think this one's better, because that one's still going to be there. So b3, the wrong idea. c5 is really the best choice. And then if you still get the knight takes knight, you can play the same line. Take with the bishop. There's no rook to take, so he'd have to take with the king. And then we grab the knight with our pawn. Bobby playing queen d4 instead. Now rook e4 hits the queen. Now queen c5. Knight takes the knight. Bishop takes the bishop check. King takes the bishop. And, you guessed it, pawn takes the knight. Here b3 and queen c7. Rook takes rook is probably worth considering. Bobby did get a star here. I've been losing all day long on my alternate lines. Ah, finally. Finally, I get a star. Okay. Anyway, queen c7 was Fischer's move. Well, Cardoso doubles his rooks. Queen d7 super defense. Queen e2 triple battery. King f8 triple defense. And we get rook takes the rook. You can actually create some tension here. Instead of rook takes rook, play queen d2. Oh, another inaccuracy. Well, my point is it does keep more tension in the position. I'd have to defend this, wouldn't I? I guess not. I give up. From such good scores last week to horrific scores this week. Well, rook took the rook. The bot not liking that any more than it liked my move. Queen took the rook, which seems like the wrong way. Of course, taking with the rook simplifies everything. Yeah, that gets a question mark. If you take with the rook, everything just gets traded down. And that should be a draw. So apparently Bobby just trying to keep things hot. But Cardoso says, I'll just trade down anyway. Here again, queen d2 might be worth a try, hitting that pawn. You get a discovered attack, and you're hitting that pawn. So you're winning that pawn, because he's got to get out of the attack. Instead, Cardoso is affable to simplification, and that's going to lead to a drawn position. Here, king f4, bishop c8, bishop e4, king e7, pawn h4, pawn a5, bishop f3, king d8, king e3, king c7, bishop e2, king b6, king d4, bishop d7, getting a question mark, bishop f3, bishop back to c8, bishop back to e2, bishop back to d7. That satisfied the time control. f6 is being screamed for by the bot. But bishop d7, now c5 was played. Pawn takes the pawn, king to e5, aiming for the d6 square. And bishop b5 is played here. And look at the eval bar. That's a big, big mistake right there. c4 is the move. And after bishop takes, you don't want to take with the pawn. Let's start with what not to play. Do not play pawn takes the pawn, king c5. Black would win that. So bishop takes. You'd still play king c5. Oh, or pick up that pawn, yeah. I'm not firing too well today, but this is a humongous mistake. Should be a decisive mistake. After bishop takes the bishop and king takes the bishop, this pawn is faster than Bobby's pawns. He's already a passed pawn. Bobby hasn't created a passed pawn. So the decisive move here was not played by Cardoso. Cardoso with king d6. g5 is the decisive move that freezes everything in place on the king side. So now after c4, pawn takes pawn check, you can't take this because this pawn just runs. You'd have to play king b6. And then king d6. Oh, you could play king c4. Yeah, my mistake. I'm playing terribly today. Not that it matters. Look at the eval bar. This is winning all day. I mean, it's the same thing. It is just different. And you can even play c5 here. Even better, his h5. And the point is, on g takes h5, g6, the whole point is to make this square available to the king. So you give away the house in order to create access. And once the king is on e7, these squares are defended. And that's that. It's actually a good technique to know. Let's go over that again. The biggest problem for the king is he has to escort the pawn. So black might think, I've accomplished my purpose. So we do a double decoy. We decoy the g pawn to vacate g6. Then we decoy the f pawn to undefend e6. It's really instructive. And you're just too slow. Game over. Cardoso played king d6 right here, hoping for king c7 with the same idea of running the pawn up. However, blocking your passed pawn spends so much time, and Fischer can now play c4, and he does. And of course, if c3 is allowed to be played, the pawn will promote. So he played pawn takes pawn, but now king takes pawn, and the king cannot come to c7. He has to come to c6. But those extra couple of tempi surrendered by Cardoso were enough for Fischer now to create an attack with his pawns. a4 and b3 is the winning threat. So d6 coming to d7. Black can't prevent that. All he can do is push his own pawn. Takes and takes. And both sides will promote on the same turn. Of course, Bobby has some initiative available. Cardoso has some initiative available. Bobby with one extra pawn, but it's irrelevant with these queens. Cardoso's turn to move, so his initiative is the one that counts. King c3, queen takes the f-man, queen e4 check, king d6, queen takes the pawn, queen takes g7 check, king d3, queen f6, king e3. Draw was offered by Fischer and accepted by Cardoso. Quite an instructive game here that would be worthy of reviewing again. An equal game until bishop b5. An amazing position. The amazing move that keeps the table level is c4. And black is threatening, of course, to pass the pawn, so white has to capture one way or the other, and he really has to capture with the bishop, not the pawn. Now, I emphasize this because the temptation is to capture with the pawn and say, well, I've got two passed pawns. But after king c5, those passed pawns are going nowhere, whereas yours might be going somewhere. But with bishop b5, the missed opportunity from Cardoso was here. He needed g5 to freeze everything in place, and after c4 and takes, the king has to come to c5. But the technique for white is to make the e6 square available to his king, and so he gives away the entire king side. Oh, I forgot to push my pawn, sorry. And then he gives away the entire king side. The bot actually saying you should have pushed ahead and tried to make a passer here. That's interesting. It doesn't matter because after h takes g6, f must take g6 or else. And that square becomes available to the white king. And you're just too slow. You're 3 away, and he's only 2 away. So quite a game. Putting it into the analysis bot, 88.3 accuracy for Cardoso, 88 for Fischer. Both players getting a single game rating of 2,500.